Welcome, friends. We're back talking Doctor Who Season 1, Episode 4 or 5, depending on where you're watching it. I'm going to go with Episode 4. This one's entitled 73 Yards. Now, there will be spoilers ahead. If those aren't for you, you've been warned. Let's crack on with it. This is my second attempt recording this video. I recorded 24 minutes without audio, so oops. That means I have no idea what I said, and I'm going to miss at least 14 key points I wanted to talk about, but I guess those are the breaks. This was a fantastic episode of Black Mirror.
All kidding aside.
If you remove the Doctor and the Tardis from this story, it really had that entire vibe going for it. Sure, it didn't have a real overarching story as far as technology gone amok or anything like that, but it really had the same vibe, right down to the fact that there was no Doctor Who opening title sequence or anything, and I thought that was a really, really good decision for this episode. It looks like RTD is back with a Dr. Light story showing us a companion navigating an alternate timeline on their own. That's something he's done several times before, somewhat reminiscent of Martha Jones walking the Earth or Donna in Turn Left. And if we have to pick something for Rose, I guess something like Father's Day. A little bit different, but it was an alternate pocket dimension, and the Doctor was removed from that story for some of it. So I guess maybe that's like the proto version of this. Really quite a few questions and mysteries going on in this episode, not all of which were answered in a clear-cut manner, and I actually really like the fact that they did that. I suppose the first one we should really dig into is why did the Doctor disappear and why did the TARDIS remain, but it was kind of unavailable as far as Ruby being able to access it? Well, I think there were a couple of things going on here. So the very first component of this is breaking that fairy circle. We know all the superstition stuff is really spilling into the universe, so I think by doing so, they actively broke the universe and created a sort of pocket dimension. This was actually mentioned a little later in the episode when Ruby and Kate were talking, and Kate called it,
I think this timeline might be suspended along your event.
So I think by breaking the circle, they actively created this pocket timeline where the Doctor continued along the timeline outside, like the prime timeline, I guess you could say, and Ruby was inside this pocket dimension with the TARDIS. Now we've seen the TARDIS is usually unable to function once it leaves its own reality. I'm thinking most specifically of the Doctor's Wife episode, where as soon as they crashed outside of the universe, the TARDIS began to die because it didn't have access to its own dimensional energies or whatever they called it. I didn't look it up. And I think this tangential bubble reality was also a time loop, kind of functioned under similar rules to episodes of other sci-fi shows, like if you add things from Cause and Effect in TNG, Window of Opportunity in Stargate, and even a little bit of Remember Me from TNG, I think those are similar rules where the time loop or the pocket dimension is only able to be interacted with in a certain vicinity. And that could also help explain other things in this episode, how technology seemed stagnant to the point where in the future they were still using kind of smartphones, and even on Ruby's deathbed, way, way, way in the future, she was saying,
say light out loud and it comes on.
Yes, I know. That's not new. We had that when I was young.
This really indicates to me that this was a cut-off section of reality, timeline, however you want to phrase it, which also means that there was no real outside threat. There were going to be no invasions or anything, which would help explain why when Unit was kind of sidelined after encountering all of this shenanigan stuff going on, there wasn't a need for them to stop any incursions or anything because no aliens were a part of this pocket dimension. So there was no Sontaran invasions, there was no Attack of the Daleks or anything, because this little pocket version of Earth, this little slice of life, is the only real reality going on here. Now, this also leads to the question of why stopping Roger Ap William mattered if this timeline wasn't the real one and didn't matter. There are a couple of possibilities behind that, but I think part of it is this was generally just a storyline for Ruby. If you want to look at it a bit more matter-of-factly, this could be the chestnuts of, don't run away from yourself. You have the greatest potential within you. You don't need the Doctor to accomplish great things. Don't let fear define you. You know, all of those sorts of things. I also think, though, that when this created a branch timeline that was also a time loop within this bubble, it didn't necessarily just end at the moment of defeating the villain. And speaking of which, the way the villain was defeated in this, I actually really liked it. It turned a detriment into the way to win. Now, granted, this timeline was kind of always set up for that to be the conclusion. To see Ruby actually use this thing that's been, I guess you could say, haunting her for most of her life and turn it against the real enemy of the story in a way that actually worked with the conventions of the story as far as keeping 73 yards away from something, I really liked the cleverness of that plan. And once this was accomplished, she continued to live out the rest of her life, and I think that's because this entire bubble reality was tied to her and her lifeline, which means she grew old after the fact, had, 40 more years after accomplishing this goal, and then and only then was kind of the rubber band broken and she was able to die, snap back to the beginning of the time loop, and inevitably prevent the time loop from being created in the first place, although not really, because the Ruby we see at the end of the episode is not the same Ruby from the beginning. That one grew old, lived all of her old age, and that one lived her entire life inside of this pocket dimension, snapped back, and then prevented it from happening. Now, I think this realm could still be out there, even though once they repaired the fairy circle, we have now lost access to this alternate dimension, but that doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't still exist out there. So there is the potential for an alternate Ruby somehow, somewhere, and all of these alternate versions of characters to exist in the ether, and I'm wondering if we're going to get that tied up later on, or if that's just never going to be brought up again. This was also the first time we got acknowledgement from Ruby that Susan Twist's actress looks very familiar playing a different character here. Now, this was in the alternate timeline, and it's not the Ruby we ended the episode with, so for all intents and purposes, she probably won't remember this encounter the next time we see her in next episode, which means the only point of reference new Ruby will have in the future will be Boom, so when and if they encounter Susan that episode, it'll probably be the first time that version of Ruby thinks she's meeting this person. Did that make sense? Probably not, but I'm rambly, I know. The other real question here is, how did Ruby become herself at the end of the episode? I have a couple of ideas kind of going on, but I'm liking that they didn't give us a clear-cut answer. The very first idea I have is that this is actually being planned to be explained later on once we find out exactly who Ruby is. Now, there was an interesting quote in here when those tavern folk were kind of playing up the supernatural and mysterious elements. They mentioned that
you've broken it. And if that woman outside is his herald?
Now, I think if you twist that on its head a little bit, we find out that this mysterious, creepy woman is Ruby from a future timeline, which means, is Ruby actually going to turn out at the end of the season to truly be a herald of some other being? And I think all signs kind of point to yes. Is she a goddess? Is she some sort of alternate dimension being? Is she a construct of some other being used to trap the Doctor, kind of baiting him with a perfect companion with all of these mysteries so that the one who waits, or whoever it's going to turn out to be, can trap the Doctor? Or is the Doctor already within a trap and Ruby is part of that bait, but she doesn't actually know who she is, and that revelation is kind of going to splinter her mind or something at the end of the season? We do know that there's some unknowable power within Ruby that has some connection to her true parentage, Christmas, music, the one who waits, the old being or something the maestro said was there at her birth. So there's definitely a lot more going on with Ruby, and I think that's why she was able to interact with herself. There was always this 73-yard connection between Prime Ruby and Copy Ruby within this pocket dimension that was only snapped at the moment of her death when she was sent back to the beginning. So what's the purpose of the 73 yards? Well, I went into way too many rabbit holes when RTD explained this is purely just 73 yards is the distance it takes for, I guess, someone with 20/20 vision to be unable to fully realize and recognize a person from a distance, and that's why he went with it. I was looking into all sorts of things like converting it to meters. It was 66.7. I'm like, maybe it's supposed to be like 66.6666, the number of the beast, something like that. Then I went into this whole rabbit hole of alternate dimension theory about how the universe works, and it kind of is expanding, maybe between 73 and 74 kilometers per second per megaparsec, and other universes are expanding at a different rate, and that was like, what? That has nothing to do with this. Then it got me thinking, like, well, maybe they talk about universes being like different vibrational frequencies, so the distance between our universe and that universe is 73 yards in the grand scale of multiverse theory or something. None of that really ties in. I really overthought that, and I don't know. Oops, sorry about that. Something else that really stood out to me in this episode, the Doctor cannot remember Ruby's time frame for the second or third time in this very short collection of episodes.
Wait, what year are you from?
2024?
I don't know if that's supposed to kind of imply there's something going on, or if it's just more of the Doctor is now so old he can't really keep track of where and when things are from. I don't know, but I feel like that might be laying seeds for something that we're going to figure out in a little bit. Great to see a lot of the modern day characters interacting with Ruby, even though almost all of their endings were fairly tragic. Not that they're the real versions of these characters, but it was nice to see this character growth for Ruby, even if it's not going to be the Ruby we get to see going forward. The other remaining question I have is, how did the Doctor know who Roger Ap William was in the Prime version of events if he didn't come to power after Ruby changed things in the real timeline? And I'm thinking there's a couple of different explanations for that. One being, he always exists. This is a person that has always lived and always does go on to become this person. The only difference is when they broke the fairy circle and released Mad Jack, he was kind of like, I don't know, some sort of a demon or paw wraith that then went on to possess this person, or at least influence him in more evil ways. So he still exists, he just doesn't have the demon in him. The other possibility is because of the Doctor's temporal awareness, he was just remembering events from a future that doesn't come to pass and not really putting two and two together or even knowing these aren't the real timeline events. This is probably my favorite episode. I know I said that last time that that boom was probably the best episode in years. Felt very like early Capaldi era. Detached from Doctor Who, this is just the type of unique story I like, and I hope we get more of this type of stuff in the future of the show. At the end of the day, what did you think? Did you like this episode? Where do you think we're going in the future? Do you have any theories? Are you enjoying this season? Whatever you think, leave all that down below. Like, share, subscribe, do all those fancy YouTube things. But until next time...